At least 30, probably more, protesters are admitted to have been killed by U.S. troops and the Afghan police. Has that been on the nightly news? Do you see that on the nightly news? Is that up there with Syria and stuff on the nightly news? Now, the trigger for this uprising was the kind of insult that, when it comes on top of injuries too numerous to mention, becomes the last straw for the people. The U.S. has hundreds of bases in Afghanistan, hundreds, and many of them it holds people in the most abysmal conditions. People who suspects of supporting the Taliban or maybe just being against the U.S. occupation. Now, the Pentagon has confiscated hundreds of Qurans from these prisoners who sought some solace in the Quran, the holy book of Islam. Somebody had to have been a high-ranking officer to have the authority to do this. Somebody in the U.S. military decided to burn these books that had been taken away from these prisoners who are being held and tortured and abused in these U.S. prisons. Well, when word got out about these Qurans being burned, it was the last straw. The people became incensed. It was a direct insult to them, to who they felt they are, their culture, their history. And it came after so many other insults had piled up. It came out, you know, not long ago that a bunch of Marines took a videotape of themselves urinating on prisoners that they had captured, people they had on the ground handcuffed. There have been years of ethnic insults against the Afghan people by troops raiding their homes in the middle of the night. It came after the people were routinely treated as barbarians by people who knew nothing about their ancient history and their culture. So they rebelled. They just went out putting their lives on the line, thousands and thousands. Now, the Obama administration, a while ago, announced that it would withdraw combat troops by the end of 2014, but still leave plenty of U.S. personnel there to protect U.S. interests, which of course means U.S. corporate interests. And the government has talked as though the situation up until now, as though the situation in Afghanistan was stable from their point of view, from the point of view of Washington. But that idea was exploded over these last 10 days. Because most of all, it revealed that hatred of the occupiers exists not only in the streets and the villages, but among those trusted with running the Afghan army and police, who have been trained by the US and the British and the other imperialists who are part of NATO. And this point was really hammered home when on February 24th, two high-ranking U.S. officers working inside the Afghan Ministry of the Interior in a super secure room were found shot to death by an Afghan intelligence officer who escaped, by the way. Well, this shocked the Pentagon, the White House, and the State Department. And just a few days after that, two Afghan soldiers shot rockets into barracks where U.S. soldiers were sleeping, killing two of them. So you see, within the very institutions that they were supposed to leave behind that would protect U.S. corporate interests, this and hatred of the occupation has reached a boiling point. All this shows that oppression may succeed for a while, for a long time, in subduing a people, but it only sows the whirlwind that will eventually break out, sometimes where it may be least expected. We don't know the politics of these soldiers who have turned their guns against the occupiers of their country. Maybe they want an Islamic republic in place of the puppet regime set up by the U.S. Maybe some of them have even longer memories back to the days when the US CIA created an army that dragged down the progressive, secular PDPA government. Whichever it is, we do know that any leftists who have survived, as well as those who fight in the name of Islam, are united on one thing at least, that their main enemy is the imperialist occupiers who have grabbed their country in order to make it a neo-colony of Washington and Wall Street. Now, we're Marxists, and we have a Marxist view, which I think Comrade Monica so beautifully explained in her presentation. We have a Marxist class view of things. Ever since 2001, we have opposed this imperialist war in Afghanistan, based on our view of imperialism as a tool, as a stage, a final stage, really, of world capitalism. And we also opposed the CIA's war against the PDPA and the Soviet Union in the earlier period. And we have said again and again to people in the movement here who could have been confused by all the propaganda that this war had nothing to do with women's rights or democracy or even getting rid of bin Laden. After all, he's gone, you know. He's been gone for a year. They're still there. The U.S. is still there. That it was driven by the U.S. strategy coming from the imperialists on how to exploit the Middle East, how to weaken the Soviet Union back at that time, and today on how to better exploit the people in the areas all around the Black Sea, many of whom used to be part of the USSR. I want to end by saying this, that when all this news came out about what was happening in the last 10 days in Afghanistan, I was reading articles in the New York Times, and at the end of each article, they often will include comments that people make about the article that they send in by email. And they're interesting.